looks like there's clouds everywhere today. Could rain any second. And what's going on today? I guess this was kind of interesting. I was reading how there was this microdrone. At first I thought it was more consumer oriented, but this one's actually kind of neat. This one says, maple seeds inspire efficient spinning microdrone. A 50-gram Samara drone can self-stabilize and hover for over 24 minutes. So would this be more like a monocopter, I guess, design? It's kind of cool. It says maple seed pods, also called Samaras, are those things you see whirling down from maple trees in the fall, helicopter style. The seed pods are optimized for maximum airtime through efficient rotating flight, thanks to an evolutionary design process that rewards the distance traveled from the parent tree, resulting in a relatively large wing with a high ratio of wing to payload. So is it kind of like an inspiration from nature? It says Samara drones, or monocopters more generally, have been around for quite a while. They make excellent passive spinning gliders and dropped in mid-air, and they can also achieve powered flight with the addition of a propulsion system on the tip of the wing. Do people who build their own drones for fun build stuff like this usually? It says this particular design is symmetrical using two sizable wings, each with a tip propeller. The electronics, battery, and payload are in the center, and the flight consists of the entire vehicle spinning at about 200 RPM. And they say here the bicopter is inherently stable, with the wings acting as aerodynamic dampers that result in passive attitude stabilization, something that even humans tend to struggle with. With a small battery, the drone weighs just 35 grams, with a wingspan of about 60 centimeters. That's kind of cool. It says the key to the efficiency is that unlike most propellerized drones, the propellers aren't being used for lift, but they're being used to spin the wings, and that's where the lift comes from. And it says with a 650 milliampere hour battery is about 42.5 grams and can hover for about 24.5 minutes. That's kind of cool. It makes you wonder too, if drones are getting lighter and lighter in these ways, are there going to be more restrictions afterwards? And then I was reading this, which seemed to be a continuation of all that news about how here in Canada there may be bills and so forth that try to regulate things like online content. This one was kind of interesting. It says, Google warns Canada's online news bill could force subsidies on biased outlets. Google is warning that the federal government's online news bill could force its subsidized non-authoritative or biased news sources, such as the Russian state-sponsored news agency Sputnik. But the organization representing Canada's news media industry says the wording of the bill is tight and specifically excludes outlets that promote the interests of an organization. Actually, I was trying to think about that. Doesn't that mean it's kind of bad? Because that would imply the law is saying we will restrict anyone who does not agree, I guess, with a certain viewpoint or talk about a certain viewpoint, because where do you draw the line there? Because I know this article is trying to say, with that statement there, oh no, that'll never happen in terms of promoting, let's just say, a bad organization or news organization, because we can dictate if they promote this type of information, then they will be banned per se. It says the bill, known as C18 in Parliament, would make tech giants such as Google and Meta pay for reusing news produced by Canadian news organizations. The proposed legislation would also prevent tech giants penalizing or giving preference to news organizations it has reached agreements with. But Google says this could affect the way it ranks news on its search engine and moderates content. So again, when you read these phrases, when you really think about it, I know what they're trying to say, but it's actually bad. It says Skelly said the tech giant supports the central aim of the bill, but is concerned the legislation, as drafted, could have unintended consequences, including making it pay news businesses that don't meet journalistic standards. This could potentially include two people who set up a digital news organization from their basement, foreign state-sponsored news groups with a bureau in Canada, or news outlets with a far left or far right bias. Another one of those left and right stuff. It says, we believe that this isn't an outcome policymakers intended and hope to work with them to address these concerns. And so I guess here with this bill and people in Canada, their rationale is, oh, don't worry, we have that covered, because they say here, this is a very good legislation that specifically excludes news outlets that promote the interests of an organization as opposed to producing original news content of general interest. The bill will allow many smaller publishers to come together and negotiate content licensing agreements with big tech firms. We urge parliamentarians of all parties to work together and pass this urgently needed legislation before the summer recess. Again, to me, that sounds kind of bad. It sounds okay on one side where you're like, okay, well, we want to license all these people, and if they promote, I don't know, something crazy that's dangerous and all that, then they won't be considered a quote news organization or something like that, so they will be excluded. But at the same time, with how things have been panning out in a lot of categories, how do you determine, I guess, what is right and what is wrong if you basically suppress them in the beginning? And let's just say if the person at the top or something like that is corrupt or biased, what's stopping them from saying, well, I don't consider this person or that person as, let's just say, I don't know, like in this case, like a journalist or something like that. Off the top of my head, the best example would be this Emergencies Act thing. For example, I know there was a lot of reports where, they had to invoke this Emergencies Act because they couldn't get rid of, for example, those truckers without it. They needed this power. Whereas I know when you were looking at things like the videos and stuff like that, it looked like it was cleared already, so that didn't make sense. So wouldn't that be, quote, disinformation, for example, or it's not credible? And even in recent times, like when they're investigating this, like this one here says, RCMP cleared border blockades without Emergency Act's powers. Committee hears. So here they're kind of clarifying we didn't really need it, according to this, because it says extraordinary powers granted to police under the Emergencies Act weren't used to clear protest blockades at Canada's borders crossings, RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki said Tuesday. Lucki testified virtually at a House of Commons committee made up of members of parliament and senators tasked with studying how the Emergencies Act powers were used, saying, quote, in RCMP jurisdiction, we successfully used a measure approach and existing legislation to resolve border blockades. So if you think about that, again, it was all dealt with already. You didn't need this, yet they decided to use it anyways. But in terms of, let's just say, news and all that, I know just from listening to people talk and so forth, there was a division where there was a huge group of people saying, no, they had to use this because without it, they were still blocking, I don't know, the bridge and all that. Whereas in this testimony, that would imply, no, it was done with already. So what was the reason to invoke this? So imagine there, just in terms of restrictions, downranking, banning people, imagine somebody just walked outside, they're live streaming everything. This is what the situation is. So with this regulation, are you gonna say, nope, you're not a quote journalist, you're banned, you're blocked, you're deranked. But then if another outlet, let's just say a more mainstream one here, reports, nope, that's what's happening, everything's being blocked, they need this, isn't that like the quote, I don't know, disinformation? So how do you determine, like, in that case, who should have the quote, I guess, authority to say what is right, what is wrong, versus people just showing the information, putting the facts together afterwards? And it makes me wonder too, just thinking of it critically in a non-biased way, they're talking about things like state-sponsored media, which would imply a certain organization is paid by, let's just say, the government of a country to promote certain propaganda and all that. Can't you argue almost everywhere in the world there is an organization that's using government money, like a media outlet, to do news reporting and stuff like that? I think here, even in Canada, I believe, there's news organizations that are funded by the government, aren't they? I mean, you could argue whether or not what they write and so forth is accurate, but if that's the definition, whether or not they're funded by the government, taxpayers and all that, or whatever, then technically a lot of them would actually fall inside that, I guess, bucket, you could say. Overall, I just currently don't see a way how you can do this without being, I guess, biased, where it could end up being worse than anticipated. I can only see the most fair way would be, unless someone is doing something explicitly crazy, like saying we are gonna go to this place or whatever and kill these people, like that type of thing. That's a little different, but overall I think the only fair way is to allow people to report, let's just say, the facts as they see it, and then people put the pieces together, in my opinion. It just seems kind of dangerous to allow, I guess, one person or whatever, if they have a bias, to determine what is the quote, I guess, truth and what isn't, per se. Alright, see you guys later.